Well, 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 look what finally came out. Not that I personally doubted it would, mind you. Maybe it's because I was never obsessed with Hollow Knight to the same degree as some of my friends, but I always figured it would be done when it was done, since if there's one thing that's generally accepted about making a video game, it's that it takes a long time if you're doing it right. Also, I'm a Kingdom Hearts fan, so I was forced to learn patience the long and hard way. But now Silksong is out and you can play it and even talk about it. Imagine that. I don't want my previous statement to make it sound like I don't like the first game. I actually loved it. I like Metroidvania games, and I like platforming games, and I fucking love Souls-likes. So the game hit this amazing little sweet spot where it was basically everything I wanted out of a game that I didn't know I wanted at the time of release. And I know I'm not alone in that, considering Silksong was such a highly anticipated game and guaranteed success that not only did they price it at $20, but it also scared every other indie developer into postponing their own releases for fear of being buried under an avalanche of tossed aside clown wigs as the people sing in rapturous glee that the wait is finally over. In the interest of transparency, since I do my best to be as objective as possible in my reviews, this game was a birthday present from a friend and I'm an avid Souls-like player, and I also replayed the first game in anticipation of Silksong's release to get myself back in the proper headspace, which I don't have footage of because I was playing it on console, so that's where I'm coming from when it comes to reviewing the game. I am a fan, I am a certified gamer, and while I did enjoy this game, I do have some criticisms, which will be in their own little section of the video. So if you're just here to throw a tantrum over the fact that someone had the audacity to say something negative about your blurbo in an overall positive review, you're free to leave your angry comment and find someone else to watch. As for everyone else, let's start gushing over the cute bugs, shall we? Also, if there's an aspect of the game I didn't mention that you're curious about because I just can't cover everything, feel free to send me a Tumblr ask about it. I'll put the link in the down there part. Okay, now we can start. God, this game is fucking cute. I never did a video on the original game, mostly because it was 5 years old by the time I actually started my channel, but if I did I feel like I'd have spent too much time gushing about how much I love the art style, so let me just put it on record that I fucking love the character and creature design in this game. It's so fucking good. When it comes to talking about game sequels, the question that's often raised is whether the sequel improves upon the first game or is just more of the same. And in most regards, I'd honestly say there's been quite a bit of improvement. The experience and money that Hollow Knight brought them has obviously served Team Cherry well. So let's talk mechanics. This section is meant for people who haven't played the game yet or are just starting, so skip to the timestamp if you don't need the explanation. Much like their first game, Silksong is a Metroidvania platformer Souls-like, and many of the basic skills that served you in Hollow Knight will transfer fairly well as far as traversal and combat goes. There are two huge changes to your base kit however, and the first is the change to your down attack. Instead of Ghost's downward swing, Hornet instead hurls herself diagonally towards the enemy like a missile, and this single movement change will probably be the hardest for returning fans to get used to, and I seriously do recommend that you do everything in your power to get used to it, because while you do gain the ability to change it later on, that won't come until a little over halfway through Act 1, so a lot of your ability to make progress in the game will be tied to how well you can adapt to it. That said, once you do get used to maneuvering diagonally and the fact that the dive is just a little shorter than you'd think, Hornet has some of the best movement controls of any 2D platformer I've ever played. She's a far more acrobatic character than Ghost was, and since she can actually grab onto ledges and pull herself up because she doesn't have tiny T-Rex arms, this, when combined with the movement skills you acquire throughout the game, makes just getting around incredibly fun. Also, and praise the Pale King for this fucking edition, Hornet can run. Her dash is shorter, but holding it means you can zoom across far lume at gay walking speed, which gives you a further jump and means that you don't have to mash the dash button to get anywhere in a reasonable time frame like you did in the first game. Thank fuck for that, even if I do tend to misjudge the distance and run right off the platform I'm trying to jump from. The other big change to your base kit concerns healing and focus. Your focus meter has been replaced by your silk spool, which still refills by smacking anything dumb enough to look at you funny, but your heal has been changed to the bind action, which recovers 3 masks worth of damage instead of 1, and can be done mid-air, but also uses the whole of your starting spool, and you won't be able to heal twice in a row until extremely late in the game, if at all. And this is extremely important, take this warning seriously. Just like in the first game, getting struck in the middle of healing will both damage you and use up the resource you were just going to. However, getting struck while healing in this game uses up all of your silk, regardless of how much extra you had. And yes, I will be complaining about this in the criticism section, so we'll put a pin in it for now. Outside of the base kit, crests, tools, and silk skills are the biggest changes to contend with. As opposed to Ghost, who had access to all of their skills at once and only had to switch out the charms, Hornet uses a materia-esque system wherein you equip tools and switch them out as needed at benches. There are 3 different categories of tools: combat, support, and exploration. And you'll start with a single slot for each one, but you'll be able to unlock additional notches using memory lockets, which you'll gain either by purchasing them from merchants or finding them in the world. And don't worry about saving them up, because there's more than enough to go around. Different tools also interact with each other in different ways, like the Pull-It pouch adding poison to combat and support tools, so pay special attention to what happens when you equip them. Your combat tools don't use silk, and are instead crafted when you sit on the bench using mask shards, so use them all you like because you'll pretty much never run out of shards. The number you can carry and the damage they deal is tied directly to your tool pouch, so upgrade that whenever you can if you really like using your tools. Now, silk skills do use your silk, and you can only equip one at a time, except for a couple crests. The skills can make combat easier, but just as with healing, if you're hit in the middle of using some of them, you'll lose all your silk, so time it carefully. Finally, we have crests, which you can swap out at benches and bring the most dynamic changes to the gameplay, since they change your attacks and sometimes your healing. I'm not going to go into the details of how they change up everything, but just know that if you're having trouble with the platforming and dive pogoing, then the Reaper Crest will be your best friend. Because I'm saving the criticisms for their own section, I have to say I think that, in a vacuum, Silksong's mechanics are really quite fun. It's certainly more restrictive than the charm and spell system of the first game, and it will take some getting used to, but there is a lot of enjoyment to be had once you can firmly grasp the intricacies of it all. Okay, that's enough technical explanation, let's talk presentation. As I said before, I fucking adore the character designs in this game, but that adoration also extends to the game's entire aesthetic. Visually speaking, this game is absolutely gorgeous. I know some people aren't a fan of Farloom looking more like a standard fantasy setting in comparison to the general journey to the center of the earth thing that Hollow Knight had, but I honestly really enjoy the sheer variety of locales you can find in this game. And considering Silksong has the bigger map overall, there is a lot to see. From the marvelously pretty caverns of the Moss Grotto, to the bone-plated hinterlands of the Marrow, to the mystic wariness entrenched in the Wisp Thicket and tranquil beauty of Mount Fae, there's a real sense of life to Farloom that you didn't really see in Hollow Nest, and the differences in people and architecture is also kind of fascinating. There's a fragile vitality to Bone Bottom that directly contrasts Dirtmouth's sturdy emptiness, and the Citadel is so much bigger and more vibrant than the City of Tears. And there's just nothing remotely comparable to Bellheart or the Deep Docks. You do sacrifice a sense of cohesion for this, but I personally find it to be a far more interesting world to explore, even if it does have a poison swamp so loathsome and vile it would make Miyazaki do a double take. It's also a lot of the little details that really make the game for me. Like, I think it's really cool how Hornet's rosaries all briefly form a body double of her when you smash open your cocoon. I really like that the tiny ants in Hunter's March carry things away, and I really like that NPCs have their own paths and little habits, quirks to the movements that fit the characters. Speaking of the characters, I really like the wish system. The first game had quests as well, but they were honestly quite vague and could be hard to follow at times, which I know is pretty part and parcel with the Souls-like genre, but I have played enough games in it to appreciate when quality of life changes are added and accessibility options are available, and the wish system is just better overall, plus it often gives you insight into the characters requesting your help, which makes them feel far more fleshed out. Also, and this is entirely crucial to state, the fleas are 1000% better than the grubs. I adore these fluffy little puppy nuggets, and even the completely bullshit methods of finding some of them cannot change that. I love them! They're so cute! They go oh. But by far, the winning category in all of this is the sound design. Oh my god, it's so good. It might be partially due to the fact that I played this on PC and therefore had headphones on, but the sound design in this game feels so much better than the first game. The characters' voices all feel very distinct and have a range of emotion, and all of Hornet's actions are made to feel more sharp and satisfying thanks to the sound effects. Her weapon sounds quicker and sharper than Ghost's, which is really cool. I also really like that you can locate NPCs through sound, with their voices growing louder the closer you get. It's very satisfying. That's actually how I found my beloved Chakra the first time, and blessed be this Amazon bee and her lovely voice. And then there's the music. Oh my fucking pale shooting stars. Christopher Larkin is an absolute monster. The music isn't just good, there are some very specific emotions that it's able to very strongly conjure up. I've talked before about how much I love it when the music in a game gives an area a real sense of place. That's one of the things I loved about both Wandersong and Night in the Woods, and Silksong absolutely nails this. The accompanying track for each area doesn't just complement the vibe, it makes the area what it is. For instance, Bone Bottom is a forlorn place of people who have all but given up, but there's an underlying sense of resilience to the track that reinforces the strength of the pilgrim's faith and their resolve to make the journey. If I had to bring it down to a single word, I'd say resolute. Contrast this with the Greymore theme, the sonic equivalent to a sense of fatigue. And this makes sense considering you just went through all of the docks and the far fields and maybe even Hunter's March, riding the wind up and blasting away rubble only to end up in an area that looks like depression feels. The track is demoralizing and sad, and it feels like you lost something along the way. Quite possibly your will to live. And that's probably what the pilgrims are feeling at this point, if we're being honest. But my absolute favourite tracks are the themes for Bellheart and the Choral Chambers, because they're just breathtaking. Bellheart is a town that sits before the final hardest trek in the pilgrim's journey, and all they want to do is provide comfort and hope for the weary souls that have made it to the doorstep. That's the perfect word to describe the Bellheart theme actually. Hope. It's fragile and wavering at first, like it's unsure if it should even be heard at all, but it grows as the song progresses, and you can feel the determination of the town's residents, of the pilgrims that have passed through, and in Hornet herself. A weary flame of hope, flickering and sputtering against the malevolent will of the Citadel's pale master, but never going out, still giving light, still giving warmth, a bulwark against the cruelty that infests so much of the land. Here, at least, it says, "You are safe and welcome." And then there's the Choral Chambers, which, God, how do I even put this? I'm not religious, and I have played a lot of games with a lot of churches and a lot of different musics for those churches, but this is the first time in any game that I've actually felt like there might actually be something there. The vital feeling that divinity does indeed exist within these halls. Listening to this track makes me actually feel the faith that carried the pilgrims here. Reverence, that's what this song communicates. An overwhelming sense of awe and reverence to something that, in the mind of the devoted, transcends life or logic or the world itself. It's beautiful in a way that I haven't experienced in any other game, and I think Christopher Larkin should be proud of how powerful his music is. I could go on, but I think I've made my point as well as I can. I would love to hear your favourite tracks though, so let me know in the comments which one hit you the hardest. Okay, moving on. So, Silksong takes place an undisclosed amount of time after the end of the first game, with Hornet having been captured by the veil-wearing servants of the Citadel for what she surmises must be the intended purpose of harvesting her silk. However, a chance for escape arises when one of these butterfly things lands on her cage and shorts out the restriction runes, allowing her to murder her captors and also the bridge and almost herself, before plummeting into the abyss below, waking up later in the Moss Grotto with nothing but her needle and thread, and the determination to walk off the 18 broken bones she probably collected on the way down. Hornet, just take a fucking rest. You're gonna hurt yourself, sweetie.
Karama!
There, see? Much better. And look, you made a friend.
Hey! Come on! Hey, look! I'm Papa!
Soon learning that she's in a land called Farloom, where everything's long since gone to shit and bugs are being driven kill crazy by walking face first into stray spider threads one too many times, she decides she might as well see what her kidnappers wanted from her and heads off to climb up the path of pilgrimage to the Citadel and ask whoever's in charge what the fuck they want, using the business end of her needle. In the utmost of polite manners, of course. Hera didn't raise her in a fucking barn. All joking aside, I ended up liking Hornet way more than I thought I would. I think she's my favourite character in the whole of the series now. While she had a very cold and combative air in the first game, it's pretty clear that she was either putting up a front or that she's mellowed out quite a bit with time, because Silksong Hornet is one of the politest and most level-headed people in the history of video game protagonists. It's honestly pretty great. I'm really glad they decided against making her a silent protagonist because we would have missed out on some truly wonderful character interactions. As much as I liked Ghost, it's so refreshing to control a character with agency and a reasonable personality, whereas Ghost would come across people who would make demands or be kind of really fucking rude and just silently go along with whatever they said. Hornet will either disabuse them of the notion that she exists solely for their convenience or just slap the shit out of them, which is always really funny.
This my shit. All the girls stomp your feet like this.
Honestly, it's nice to come across a random person who's like, "Hello there, could you do us a favor and strip 17 corpses so I can make a graveyard pillowcase?" And have Hornet reply, "I'll keep an eye out, I guess, but I can't promise anything because I've got a thing that's important and you're genuinely disturbing." It just makes her feel like an actual person, you know? I also love that Hornet keeps trying to put up a mask of being cool and detached, but keeps inadvertently revealing that she's actually a massive sweetheart. Like, sure, Hornet, you've only donated all these rosaries and mask shards and made sure the people are safe from predators because it might give you an advantage. Totally. And I'm sure you tracked down Sherma to protect him from the dangers of the White Ward and played your needle in for Chakra's master because of some other undisclosed reward, and not because you care about them. Hey Hornet, are your feet wet? Do you see the pyramids? Because you're currently waist deep in denial. Also, I see you and your love for fluffy things. I see you rating the creatures of Farloom based on their fluffiness. And I want you to know that you're perfect and I love you. And that's the thing, Hornet really is just a very kind individual. She does care about the people she meets and she cares about them greatly. I think there's this tendency when it comes to making characters that have lived an enormously long time, and make no mistake, Hornet is very fucking old, where writers tend to depict them as viewing themselves as above the petty feelings of the mere mortals. And while I can see the logic to it, I'm really happy they didn't do that with Hornet. Rather than grow detached or jaded, Hornet has both witnessed and experienced great pain and hardship and come out of the other side with a kind, if very practical, worldview and personality. One where violence is sometimes necessary and hardship is a fact of life, but that doesn't mean you can't try to make the world a better place while you're in it. And I really like this because it ties into the greater themes of the story quite well. At its core, Silksong is a story about exploitation, kindness, and the hope found between that carries us through it all. Farloom is a kingdom that has been built upon exploitation, with everyone and everything being used to the benefit of the Citadel, down to the very land itself. I'll fully admit to not having the timeline of events completely nailed down, but from what I've come to understand, Farloom was once the home of 4 different tribes: the Coral Warriors, the Ant-like Scar, the Beast and Plants and Dunilith, and the land of Verdania. But then everything changed when Grandmother Silk arrived and began to subjugate or destroy everything there, eventually becoming the foundation for the region's main religion that pushed out every other faith and demanded complete devotion. A devotion we definitely see in the poor pilgrims of the land. To the Citadel, the worth of a life is only measured by the usefulness it can muster, which is why the pilgrimage is so deadly. It's designed to weed out the weak while spinning a story that the weakness was a sign of a lack of devotion. This is also why, from a story standpoint, Farloom's economy is completely fucked. It's designed to wring the people dry for the sake of the Citadel's power, which is why so many benches require rosaries. Hell, it's why rosaries are the currency at all. It operates as an eternal reminder to the residents of Farloom that any kind of power can only come from the Citadel, and it comes with an inbuilt artificial scarcity. Since I'm going to be tearing into this from a mechanical standpoint later, I need to impress that I think the writing behind this is absolutely genius, and it serves to reinforce just how much of a foil Grandmother Silk is to the Pale King. By making Geo, which is a naturally occurring and abundant resource, the currency of Hollownest, he created an economy that is far more resistant to decay. Farloom's equivalent to Geo should have been the mask shards, since they're far more abundant and have actual physical use and value outside of the imaginary value assigned to currency. But that would be much harder to exploit, so rosaries were used instead. There's actually a lot that can be said about how the two parallel each other. Let me know if you'd like a video on that in the comments. I'd be up for making one if people were interested. So the pilgrims are wrung dry of their lives and their perceived value and told it's a divine trial to keep them compliant. And those that do survive long enough to arrive at the Citadel, a fucking impossible task as of late because of that bitch of a last judge, are made indentured servants in the underworks and told the lie that hard work will see them raised up to the coral holes, where they're literally made to pay for a place to rest and are told by an automated confession box that their sins can only be forgiven by working even harder. It's a closed system made to keep the actual members of the Citadel in luxury other bugs can only dream of, while exploiting the devotion of the poor and unfortunate souls of Farloom until they die of exhaustion or violence. And like I said, this exploitation extends to the land itself. Vile water is the way it is because the Citadel pours all of its waste there, choking the life out of the land and the creatures and making it the single most miserable place in the entire fucking game. And then there's the Weavers, who we learn were uplifted by Grandmother Silk herself and lied to. Told they were her daughters, that they were divine. In reality, she made them to be used, first as worshippers and then as fuel for her theocracy, as horrible experimentation found that silk can be used to extend the lifespan of a bug far past its natural limits, something that the Citadel would make gleeful use of. This, we learn, is why they fled Farloom. And because of the experiments threading silk within the residents of the nation, bugs would begin to be born with silk already strung throughout their shells, and this is the source of the curse's control. Grandmother Silk sacrificed the ones she called her daughters to gain an unbreakable means of control over the rest of the population. And she didn't take kindly to the Weavers attempting to flee their own sacrifice, as is evidenced by the tragic figures of Widow and the First Sinner. Farloom's system is corrupt to the very core, and that's why the Weaver Queen ending is the bad one, because Hornet is merely replacing one corrupt ruler with another. You can't just switch out a part of it and expect the whole thing to change. You need to tear it down and replace it with something new. And ironically, the path to this destruction is started the moment Hornet is captured. The system is a completely closed loop that would eventually decay into a total collapse of Farloom, and Grandmother Silk would probably move on to do it to another kingdom. But she just had to capture the one bug not just capable of taking her down, but completely invested in doing so. Hornet stands as the natural enemy to the Citadel and its system, not just because she's the only one with the strength and unique biology to do so, but because of who she is. She's the daughter of a displaced and haunted people and a god. And she's already lived through one apocalypse, already seen the mass loss of life and autonomy that a rampaging higher being can inflict, and having already lost her family to that entire mess, she's damn well not going to stand by and let it happen again when she can do something about it. None of the pilgrims would have ever made it into the Citadel if she hadn't cleared the path. They were never meant to. Devout and innocent bugs like Sherma, who is best boy, would have been crushed and tossed to the side by the system the Citadel has in place. But Hornet intervenes. And what's more, she does so kindly, compassionately. She reassures people of their worth outside of their assigned roles. She protects the weak and tracks down the lost, and when she comes across the nightmare that is the ensnared Bellheart, she immediately sets about finding a way to free it. And she slays the corrupt guardians that would ensure nothing can change. Hornet connects to the people as she travels through Farloom, acting as a single, unbreakable thread of hope that they can cling to, eventually finding their way to a sanctuary of sorts within their promised end goal, safer than they've ever been. Weaver still can be used to control and entrap, but it can also be used to connect and tie people together, to heal them, and that's what Hornet does. I think there's a temptation to view the game as being a critique of religion, or rather, one religion in particular, but I don't think that's quite it. I think the game is actually meant to critique systems of exploitation, while positing that kindness and compassion are needed to make the world a better place, on top of violently removing those who exploit in the first place. If the game really wanted to paint religion as bad, I don't think it would have had Chakra come to respect the pilgrims for the strength they found in their faith, even if it's something that she can't fully understand herself. What's fascinating is that even the differences in weapons reinforce the themes of the game, which I know sounds crazy, but hear me out. So back in Hollow Knight, both Ghost and the majority of weapon-wielding bugs used nails, while in Silksong, the commonly used weapon is the pin. And superficially speaking, pins and nails are very similar in concept, as both exist to hold something in place. However, a nail is intended to be a permanent fixture. Its purpose is to hold something together. It is, first and foremost, a building tool. It's a mark of civilization, maintaining something's place and form and providing stability. A pin, meanwhile, is meant to be a temporary measure. It's a sewing implement, and it's used to keep fabric together until it can be properly sewn. It's not meant to be left in the fabric and is supposed to be taken out after the cloth has been stitched together and made whole. In Silksong, pins are the main weapon of the enemy because they represent how Grandmother Silk failed to create a stable society. She created a system that would forcefully hold bugs in their place in a facsimile of order, but never granted any measure of stability. And it's also worth noting that another classic use of pins is in bug collecting. And then in contrast to all of this, we have Hornet's Needle. A needle is designed with the use of thread in mind. It is a tool used to repair or create or mend. Hornet is the only one capable of fixing Farloom because she's symbolically free of any pins, the silken curse or societal obligation, and uses her silk altruistically. Grandmother Silk neglected to make Farloom a place that could be sustained, and by the time you get there it's falling apart because there's nothing to hold it together aside from lies and force. Hornet fixes Farloom by being the only one to bring the people together, to remove the roadblocks and to wield power with the intent to help, not to control. Am I maybe overanalyzing this? Quite possibly, yeah. Is it a cool thematic detail to notice and interpret anyway? Absolutely yes. I'll have more to say on Hornet herself in a bit, but for now let's move on to the part where people think I'm being too mean to the game. This game has too many fucking bells in it. Writin, be serious. I am being serious. I'd give my polyp pouch for a single bug with a fucking drum kit. Or like, maybe a little flute? Writin. Okay, fine. God forbid I have a little fun. So I have two main points of criticism for the game, and the first and smaller point is that the rosary system is annoying. As much as I like it from a narrative standpoint, mechanically speaking, it slows your game progress to a fucking crawl as you're forced over and over again to grind out as many as possible because everything costs way too fucking much in this game. I'll be honest, I really don't think you should lose all your rosaries upon death. The reason that kind of system worked in the first game was because of how abundant Geo as a resource was. From the very beginning, almost every single enemy drops at least a small amount of Geo, which means that you're always accumulating it, and that's on top of the natural deposits you find basically everywhere. What this meant was, when you found Cornifer for the first time and had to buy a map, you could immediately afford it, and you could very likely afford either the compass or the quill right away too, so your exploration could begin with minimal resource grinding. It was efficient. Meanwhile in Silksong, you find the first shop and chakra before you're likely to ever find a single rosary, because only half the enemies in the game drop them at all, and none of them exist in the starting area, and even the frayed rosary string you can find in the Mosque Grotto isn't anywhere close to covering the cost of anything either vendor carries, which means you have to run past them and slaughter a bunch of pilgrims to afford just the fucking map, let alone the quill and compass. They might technically cost less here than in the first game, but the reality is that the resource grind and the time sink required to even start mapping out the first area make the beginning of the game annoying. Also, rosaries have this rather frustrating tendency to roll away from their former owners and fucking explode away from their environmental containers, and often into spikes that destroy them. So that's fucking fun. Apparently they're planning to patch the rosary gain and item cost soon, which is good, but it still won't fix the issue of them just being an annoying time waster. And you might point to the dead bugs purse as a solution, but that still doesn't help much because it takes up one of your extremely limited tool slots. I think the purse's effect should either just be inborn from the start, or it should just be a permanent upgrade. As it is, the whole system just makes the game less fun. And as for the big criticism, and this is the big problem with the game that every other issue it has either stems from or is exacerbated by, is that this game is way too fucking punishing. And I'm sure upon saying that I'll have a bunch of annoying tryhards popping into my comment section to cry that it's a skill issue or that I'm a fake fan or something. But let's be honest, I don't respect them enough to pretend to care. For one thing, get-gooders are one of the biggest reasons that the Souls-like fandom has such a noxious reputation. And for another, skill issue is one of those things people tend to comment when they don't like that someone criticized a thing they like, but they aren't smart enough to properly argue against the point. Not even a thought-terminating cliche at this point, it's a howl of seething cope, and no amount of LMAO is attached to it can hide the fact that they're desperately trying to conceal their outrage with a mask of detached irony. However, if you're not the kind of person who ties their entire identity to being good at Souls-like because you think it makes you an elite gamer, and that single thought is the only way you can achieve orgasm, then you might have noticed that I didn't say the game was too hard, I said the game was too punishing. Because here's the thing, Silksong isn't actually that much harder than Hollow Knight. Other critics have already talked about the game being too punishing, and to their credit, Team Cherry have a patch in the works to nerf some of the early game bosses, among other things, but this won't actually fix the issue, because the actual problem with the game, the big problem that every other issue compounds on, is that the way health and damage are balanced is fundamentally flawed. So Hornet, just like Ghost, starts the game with 5 masks, which, if you played the last game, logically means that you have 5 HP. Except this is a fucking lie, because from nearly the start of the game, you face enemies that can hit you for double damage, and all bosses have at least one attack that does 2 masks of damage as well. and the sheer number of enemies and bosses that can take away 2 masks in one hit is a problem, because unless you have the enemies memorized, which you fucking won't on a first playthrough, you can't know what can knock you down by a third of your health and what won't until it's too fucking late. What you have here is a health bar with a wildly oscillating value, where sometimes you have 5 HP and sometimes you have 3, and whichever it ends up being is entirely up to whatever random whim the devs were feeling that day. And this bullshit approach to health and damage is not fair to the player. Yeah, do you remember the concept of fairness? That thing that the entire appeal of the Souls-like genre was supposedly based on? That the games are hard but fair? Well, this game isn't fucking fair, which is baffling when you consider who it was that made it. One of the things that made Hollow Knight such a good game was how incredibly fairly designed it was. It was one of the best designed games I've ever fucking played, and it had enemies that dealt double damage too. But those enemies were incredibly rare and also designed to communicate that they should be doing that much damage. If you ever saw an enemy that size again, you knew to be on your guard because they could squash you in an instant. But not only were these types of enemy rare, almost none of the fucking bosses dealt that much damage. Think back to the first game. How many bosses outside of Godhome or the optional Dream rematches regularly dealt more than 1 mask of damage on hit? Because in my replay, I counted 3. The Traitor Lord, the Enraged Crystal Guardian, and the Radiance. And even then, the Radiance only did 2 masks as part of a big fuck you laser attack that was so heavily telegraphed you practically deserved it if you were hit at all. Fast forward to Silksong though, and the second fucking boss is doing double damage with every attack, including contact damage, including when they're fucking stunned. I shouldn't have to explain why taking 2 masks of contact damage is complete bullshit, but taking it while the boss is stunned? Team Cherry, are you fucking high? And this is how it works for almost every boss. It's fucking insane. And this isn't helped by the fact that the early game is really stingy with mask shards. Not that having 6 masks actually helps all that much. Oh good, now I can take a full 3 hits instead of only 3 hits. Look out Farloom, cause I'm fucking unstoppable now. I wasn't joking when I said the majority of the game's problems stem from this issue of health and damage. It affects everything. The rosary system would be less annoying if the run back to them wasn't made so stressful by how many enemies can take off a third of your health. Hornet's damage output, which is abysmally low by the way, you could chop a full quarter off every boss's health bar and the game would be better off, would feel less like trying to break down a brick wall with an ice pick if you didn't have to hit them 20 times to compare to the damage they deal to you in 1. The mile-long boss runs would feel like less of an arduous slog if you weren't constantly having to avoid enemies that deal the same damage as the boss, and the same goes for the minions the boss summons, and the gauntlets of enemies the game loves to throw at you over and over again. Even the healing is made worse by the fact that your effective net heal is still just 1 mask after the boss casually brushes past you, and your slow as fuck silk gain wouldn't be such a problem if you didn't desperately need to heal as much as possible. Hell, people would be more comfortable using silk skills if they didn't desperately need all of their silk to heal. If you want a good example of how bullshit unfair the game's handling of damage and healing is, you really need look no further than Sister Splinter and Widow. Sister Splinter starts out feeling manageable. Sure, her attacks do double damage and she restricts your movements with her briars, but her attacks are fairly predictable and can clear the obstructions for you. Then she summons minions that take 3 hits from you to kill and also do double mask damage, and they also fly. So the entire fight turns into a prolonged hazard dodging challenge that's more stressful than it actually is challenging, as you wait for RNGesus to bless you with a run where she doesn't spawn as many distractions, so you can actually hit her or have the chance to heal without a random extra dive bombing you from halfway across the screen. There's a good fucking reason this wooden bastard is getting patched. Widow, meanwhile, is a demonstration on why your healing fucking sucks. Her fight is a chaotic mess of bouncing projectiles as she sprints across the room and pulls the ceiling down on your head, while sometimes slashing you for double damage herself. The bells might not deal 2 masks, but she can snap into her blade flurry with 0 warning. So if you're trying to heal yourself and get clipped by a bouncing bell, and then grabbed by the bitch because this game doesn't believe in the sanctity of iframes, you've just gone down all the amount you were trying to heal, plus the damage you already took, and your silk bar was emptied no matter how much you had over the necessary healing amount. And you might as well just give up and start the fight over, because if you're already struggling enough to need to heal, you're not fucking turning the fight around with 1 mask and 0 silk, and Widow's second phase with its own way too long health bar waiting just around the corner. And yeah, it's possible to beat both of these bosses, and obviously I did, but it's also possible to fill a swimming pool with sand using only your mouth to transport it, and that's not fucking fun either. You may have noticed I mentioned iframes. Here's where we get into another big problem. Some of the enemies and environmental hazards only do double damage because they just straight up ignore your iframes, and they become increasingly common as the game progresses. The absolute worst example of this are the roaches, who leap at you and actually power through your needle attack. Nullifying your iframes and taking away your ability to deflect attacks with your weapon isn't just unfair, it's the developers breaking the rules of how the game works on a whim. This is actively malicious design, just like the 3 separate benches that are sabotaged in some way. This is a gleeful violation of the trust they build with the players throughout the entirety of the first game. I shouldn't have to explain why arbitrarily removing a core mechanical aspect like invincibility frames is bad design, and this is one of the worst design decisions I've ever seen in my fucking life. All of these things just make the gameplay so frustrating and stressful, and there's no reason for it to be so ridiculously unbalanced and unfair to the player. And for me, the breaking point in the boss design came in when I made my way to the last judge, who has all the problems of the former bosses, plus the single most annoying boss run in the game, full of these ricochet flies and sandworms and... Okay, you know what? This isn't fun. It isn't fun when every boss encounter is a desperate struggle against something that can smear me in seconds. It isn't fun when the silk I took so long to build up is pissed away because I got clipped while desperately trying to heal. And it isn't fun to have to navigate the path back every time just to get smacked back down again by a boss so rife with artificial difficulty that it feels like what I'm actually fighting is the developers. I love Souls-likes. I love a good hard boss fight. But this isn't a fair challenge. This isn't even actually hard. This is just frustrating and unfairly designed. And even when you win a fight like this, it isn't satisfying, you just feel tired. It's just not fun. So I modded the game. Yeah, that's right. For the first time in my life, I modded a Souls-like. I downloaded a single mod that clamped my damage intake to 1 mask except for the bullshit iframe ignoring ones. And I kept it installed until Act 3 when I switched it to one that kept those in check too. And I say this with zero shame or regret, because do you know what happened the moment I did do that? I started having fun again. Yeah, just this single change to the game and suddenly I was playing a fair and balanced game again, and I was enjoying myself. Because once you strip the completely artificial difficulty from the combat and the exploration, it becomes Hollow Knight again. And Hollow Knight is a really fun game. I actually beat the last judge on my first try with the mod on, because it wasn't the challenging gameplay that was gatekeeping me, it was the devs standing on my neck every step of the way. Yes, I could have eventually beaten the boss without it. I'm a seasoned Souls veteran. I've beaten all of Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Elden Ring and all of their DLCs and a few other games. But those games were never this maliciously frustrating, which is saying a lot if you're familiar with the genre, and doing so would have just been another exhausting win that didn't feel satisfying. It was a pretty easy choice to make. I just asked myself, do I care about proving myself to a game that's already shown it can't be trusted and doesn't respect me or my time? Or do I want to enjoy my lovely birthday present? Because here's the thing, once you strip away the bullshit, this game has some incredibly fun bosses. The Cogwork and Clover Dancers are amazingly well designed. Lace's first fight is one of my favorites in the entire game. Grandmother Silk is cool as hell. Phantom, Nihilith, the fourth chorus. Strip away the bad design choices and the punishing aspects and they all become fun and fair and challenging in their own ways, and they're good. I think the boss most let down by its punishing design is actually Carmelita, who's made rage-inducingly frustrating by the fact that most of her attacks ignore iframes and just add insult to injury. She's actually the boss I changed the mod for, and it still took 4 tries afterward because she's just legitimately challenging. But once again, removing the bullshit design made it a fun challenge. You know, the satisfying kind that you play Souls-likes to experience. I have a friend who still hasn't beaten her and is so frustrated that they've just given up on the game because you shouldn't need to balance it for the devs to make it fun. Carmelita is an amazing fucking boss that's absolutely ruined by the fact that Team Cherry apparently just have no self-control and hearts full of hatred for the player. The sad truth of the matter is that people just cannot trust this game. They can't trust it to respect them, or the time, or be fair or balanced. They can't trust it not to fuck them with unfair environments like the fucking maggots or the broken benches, and they just cannot trust Team Cherry anymore. The game is so dragged down by malicious design choices that even people who review it positively on Steam are warning people about it, and a lot of fans simply will not trust anything Team Cherry makes in the future because this game proves they can't. And considering Silksong was a surefire success because people played Hollow Knight and believed Team Cherry to be trustworthy, the irony of it all is enough to choke on. There's a fantastic game in here, but it is fucking buried under a mountain of the most bafflingly bullshit design decisions I've ever seen in my fucking life. So how did we get here? How did we go from the masterwork that is Hollow Knight to the fumbled potential of Silksong? Well, I have two working theories on that. The first being that this is just part of a greater industry trend involving the Souls-like genre. I don't know if you've noticed, but in recent years there's been this fucking arms race within the genre to out Dark Souls by making the games harder without any thought given to the enjoyment of the experience for the players. A trend even FromSoft has gotten in on. Well, I mean, I say recent, but it's been going on for a decade now. And in the pursuit of making the games harder, less consideration is given to making the games fun or balanced at all, with some developers often trying to pass off unfair or straight up broken boss fights as just part of the challenge. Because the reality of game design is that it's actually much harder to make a game that's challenging than it is to make one that's punishing. I hate to state the blatantly fucking obvious, but most people don't actually like this kind of design. Most people look to Souls-likes for a good challenge, not a $60 dick flattening. And developers leaning into the unhinged desires of the howling minority of people who think that beating a hard game will be what finally fills the gaping void where their happiness should be, is one of the reasons Souls-like fatigue is a thing at all. Even FromSoft has gotten into this trend by trying to outdo themselves on difficulty, to the point that Miyazaki rather famously reported he can't even beat his own games anymore. And a rather infamous patch to Elden Ring's DLC that nerfed Chosen Consort Radahn to make him a more fair challenge. And if fucking FromSoft is willing to patch their content to make it fair, what excuse does anyone else have? As I said before, Team Cherry has reportedly been working on a patch to nerf some of the early game, and I'd like to remind you that this is a good thing, despite what the bawling tryhards on Reddit might like to think. It demonstrates that they're probably more invested in ensuring their game is well received and well balanced than in protecting their egos, which is the only way they're going to start winning people's trust back. If they just pulled a Randy Pitchford and blamed the players for not being true fans or good enough at the game, they would effectively be committing industry suicide, as no one would ever trust them or their products again. And as for my second theory, I honestly just suspect that they didn't have anyone outside of the team playtest the game. Team Cherry was notoriously radio silent for the 7 years it took to produce this game, and the refinement of the mechanics paired with the imbalance to the fairness seems to imply that the people that they did have playtesting it were already in on the know for what needed to be done, meaning they weren't having the same experience a third-party tester would have, and not the experience an actual player would have. Almost anyone testing this game without the bias of being on the development team would have been able to point to the massive gaping problems it has. So either they didn't have people to point out the blatantly fucking obvious, or they just didn't listen when someone did. And I'm inclined to believe that Team Cherry are not ego-driven idiots. This is why you have playtesters in the first place, and why you need to have a varied sample size to do it properly. I'm not sure if they were intentionally secretive about the whole thing, but it's really come back to bite them in the ass. So how would you go about fixing this issue? Well, to keep things simple, because this segment has already gone on way too long, I've come up with 3 basic steps that would address the biggest problems with the game. 1. Nerf enemy and environmental damage and stabilize iframes. Seems pretty obvious. Despite the mod I used, I do think that some enemies and attacks should actually do 2 masks of damage, but the damage they currently do isn't balanced for the complexity of their movements and attack patterns. To give an example, I think Carmelita should only do double damage with the bone spikes she raises, and everything else should be capped at 1 for fairness. This would also have the benefit of making the barbed bracelet actually usable for the average player. 2. Readjust healing and silk gain. You could fix this issue either by increasing the player's base silk gain to offset the loss from being hit while healing, or by halving the amount of silk used and lowering the base healing to 2 masks. If you've nerfed the damage, then you won't need 3 at a time anyway. 3. Readjust the player's damage output. Either boost Hornet's base damage or chop a quarter from the enemy health bars, because the amount of hits it takes to kill bosses and even basic enemies is ridiculous. These obviously wouldn't fix every problem, and I just really don't have the patience to go into every single detail of the game, but it would at least solve the biggest issues people have that have been keeping them from enjoying the game. Alright, that's enough criticism, let's finish up with something more positive. I'd like to tell you my favourite part of the game, and you might be surprised to learn what it was. It wasn't finally getting the double jump, or riding in the carriage with the flea puppies, or even finally killing the Crawfather or anything like that. No, my favourite moment is actually when you get Bellhome. As you play the game and fulfill the wishes people leave on the quest boards, you're eventually given wishes relating directly to fixing up the settlements. And upon completing all of them for Bone Bottom, the village handyman gives you this adorable little statue he made of Hornet, which I loved and carried with me everywhere. But upon completing them for Bellheart, Pavo approaches you and tells you that they'd like to thank you for all of your hard work in making the town a safe place again. And that thank you is your very own Bellhome. It isn't much, all things considered. It's a little sparse and Hornet says she has no plans to settle, but it's yours. It's a gift of genuine gratitude. And sure, you have to pay to decorate it, which is one of the most expensive endeavors in the game, but it feels worth it. And it was after decorating the house and sitting Hornet down on her new bed that she just lay down. For the first time in the game, Hornet lies down of her own accord. Not because she was knocked out, and it's the only time she does so with no prompting, with no greater goal in mind. And seeing Hornet lie there, allowing herself to relax for the first time in who knows how long, listening to the beautiful music play in a town that now considered her to be one of their own, it honestly made me tear up. Because Hornet, who's lost everyone she ever cared about, who's never had a place to fit in or call her own, who spent her life fighting and running and had it drilled into her that people will come for her no matter what, who can't even remember her own mother's face, allows herself to relax, to truly rest for the first time in the game, and I think it's beautiful. But honestly, as wonderful as this moment is, it makes me a little sad to think that so many players just won't experience this for themselves. So many people who bought Silksong, people who loved the first game and were so excited to see this after 7 long years, simply will not get to see some of the best it has to offer because they can't get past the unrelenting unfairness of the design. And sure, they can always watch a Let's Play or look up the cutscenes or whatever, but they won't be anywhere near as impactful as actually experiencing it firsthand. And the thing is, there's so fucking much in this game that's just genuinely phenomenal. So much that made me so happy. It's things like following Sherma's pilgrimage and smiling as his faith and naive kindness extend to everyone around him, making the world a little bit brighter. Like coming across Chakra and feeling both relief and joy at the chance of getting a new map and talking to her again, and hearing what another outside thinks of the strange land you're in. It's things like the prison break at the slab, which is one of the funniest and tensest moments in any game I've played, as you run around bug-fugging naked, kicking enemies 1,000 times and snapping a prison guard's neck. The climb up Mount Faye, which is a really satisfying test of your platforming and orienteering skills, even though I've never met a time challenge I didn't fucking hate. It's in the Flea Festival and seeing the fluffy little puppy nuggets wearing their adorable little bell mitts, I love them so much. It's in fights like the Cogwork and Clover Dancers, and in the heartbreaking doomed yaoi of the Green Prince and his former love. Oh yeah, this game has doomed bug yaoi in it. Between this and the tragic Yuri of the first game, all we need is whatever the term is for when they're both non-binary, and we'll fondly assemble the Triforce of sad woke romance and explode the heads of every whiny little shit who throws a tantrum every time they see gay people in their video games. But most of all, it's in Hornet, in this wonderfully kind and necessarily distant person, as she strives to save everyone she's met and come to care about. Because all her years and loss have taught her the importance of kindness in a world that's so often so unfairly cruel. And Hornet is kind. You can see it in how she talks about the haunted pilgrims and consoles those who haven't moved on, in how she drops everything to save Sherma when he wanders into the White Ward to find medicine, in how she tracks Chakra through Bilewater to find her master, eventually joining her in mourning the woman that was, for all intents and purposes, the warrior's mother. How, even after everything, she never questions the validity of the pilgrim's faith because it gives them comfort and purpose. And in how she reassures Lace of the value of her life, even if it is artificial. In how she fights to save her from the grasp of the void, because she doesn't deserve to drown in that darkness after all she's been through. There's just so fucking much in this game that's genuinely so incredibly good. If this game had been properly balanced, it would have been an absolutely perfect sequel to Hollow Knight, in both themes and gameplay. But as it is now, I just cannot in good faith recommend the game without Team Cherry fixing the issues it has. If you found that you can't finish this game because of its punishing nature but really want to, I seriously recommend modding the game if you're playing on PC. As I mentioned earlier, a single change was all it took for me to start really enjoying myself again. And there is a lot in this game that fans of Hollow Knight will fucking love if they get to it. Nobody whose opinion is worth listening to will give you shit for playing the game you bought in the way that makes you happiest. And if anyone does, just tell them to go to hell. And if you're playing on console, well, let Team Cherry know how you feel and hope they patch the game soon, I guess. And no, it should not be the player's job to fix the game for the developer, but this is the only advice I have for you now. Because Silksong is great, but it's hard to appreciate that when the game isn't playing fair. Thank you for watching, and a huge thanks to my patrons for their support, especially Wisteria, Tetraphobe49, Lustrous Lizard, and Owen Oofs. I'm so glad my friend gave me this for my birthday. I honestly had a blast after all is said and done. It was also fun to talk about it, even if I did get a little heated for a while there. I have another game review coming up soon, and don't worry, this one will be far more positive overall. It's actually going to be on Hades too. So look forward to that, and like, comment, subscribe, Patreon, blah blah blah, all the things. I'm tired. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day, or whatever time it is for you right now. Bye.